Here we are. Welcome to another exciting session on story of the land. And I think I said last week that we kind of linked this to the overall theme of the month at Union Chapel. For our services are all on the creation season, and the Bible study is on land, and how the Bible looks at the question of land, which is a controversial and complicated question. This is the second one of the four that we planned, and I've called it the promised land and possession. I'll just do a quick recap of what we covered last week. Walter Brueggemann said that the Hebrew Bible, what we call the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible is a story of land promised, land lost, and land restored. I think you probably know that already. You know that this is the land that's promised to Abraham, and then to Moses, and the one that is captured, and then because of the faithlessness of the people, is lost to exile and diaspora, and then is restored again with the restoration of the temple and so on. That's a very simplistic overview, and every element of that is more complicated than it looks. Last week we said we looked at Genesis, and the definitive kind of first chapter of Genesis, which says that creation is good. You know, that creation itself is God, and God looks at creation and sees that it is good. And I think we also briefly looked at Psalm 24, the earth is the Lord's and everything that is in it. You know, God created everything. For Neil's joining us now. And then we also looked at the second chapter, second and third chapter of Genesis, very briefly again, but how Adam was created out of the soil. And when they were expelled from Eden, this thing, dust you are, and to dust you will return, which is pretty miserable. But what it shows is that the interrelationship with humanity, with the land, with the earth, with soil, that we human beings are not separate animals apart from all of this, that we actually come out of, you know, the created order. We're part of and integral to it, not separate. And then we looked at how the land of Israel was seen as a gift of God, but there were conditions, and the conditions were justice. And we looked at Isaiah chapter 5, where Israel is described as a vineyard, but that has been abused. You know, he looked for justice and there was none. He looked and there was violence, there was bloodshed. That's in Isaiah 5, and describing Israel as a vineyard. And we know that in various places in the Bible, Israel is described as a vineyard. So when we read parables of Jesus, which make reference to vineyards, it's just not an accident that he uses that location for his stories. We also looked at we looked at a lot, didn't we, actually? Naboth's vineyard, and the story of Naboth's vineyard, that Ahab and Jezebel stole this piece of land, tricked, you know, and abused the owner, Naboth, and this seeing that the land of Naboth was sacred, it was inherited, and that it should not be stolen or appropriated in any way. And this week we're going to move on and look at what are, I think, some quite uncomfortable passages in Scripture, uncomfortable realities in the biblical narrative. what does it mean to be promised a land by God? I mean, it's always seen as a great thing, but what happened to the people who were already there? We know the story of Israel. It was a land without a people, for a people without a land, was the expression. But actually, there were people there, and there were Palestinians there and Arab people there, and somehow or other, that story of the Exodus and the story of the promise of a promised land was taken and used as a theological justification for a political event, and and a complicated political event, and especially a complicated political event for Christians in the post-Holocaust period. And there is a real tension in Christian circles today around Israel and Palestine, with some parts of the church really caught up in atoning for the theological undergirding for the Holocaust, and other elements of the church looking very carefully at what's happening in Palestine and standing up for the people of Palestine. And that's it's a genuine tension in the church. It's a really difficult tension, and we might have to sort of look at that. So the question is, what does the biblical story tell us about the modern situation in Israel-Palestine? And are there any universal lessons beyond that? And just a health warning, I think this is going to be messy, this session. It's going to be ugly, folks. And there are going to be some, really quite tough questions we're going to have to ask. It's not going to be for the squeamish. But I'm sure you're not squeamish.
That's boring.
Just a reminder from last week. This is this passage from Genesis 15. We looked at it last week as well. But a reminder, that this story of the promise of the land went right back to the patriarch Abraham, sort of the founder of that those people, the Hebrews. As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abraham, and a deep and terrifying darkness descended upon him. And then the Lord said to Abraham, "Know this for certain, that your offspring shall be aliens in a land that is not theirs, and shall be slaves there, and they shall be oppressed for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterwards they shall come out with great possessions. As for yourself, you shall go to your ancestors in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age, and they shall come back here in the 4th generation. But the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete." And when the sun had gone down, it was dark. A smoking fire pot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, "To your descendants, I give this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, the lands of the Kenites and the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, and where are they? The Girgashites and the Jebusites." So, I mean, a big piece of land is being offered there. So let's stop the share for the moment. Neil is here. So hi, Neil. And I think it would be good to read a good chunk of a chapter. I want to cover 2 chapters today: Numbers chapter 34 and Judges. And we'll start with Numbers 34. Pull that up. Where is it? That's not what I wanted. So I will stop sharing and find what I really wanted, which is, yeah, can you see that?
Yep.
Have you got it, Harley?
I got it.
Hey, okay. Do we have a volunteer to read this long chapter with lots of hard words?
I'll read it if you don't mind me not looking at the screen.
No, that's absolutely fine.
So Numbers 34. The Lord
Yep.
spoke to Moses, saying, "Command the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land of Canaan, this is the land that shall fall to you for an inheritance, the land of Canaan defined by its boundaries. Your south sector shall extend from the wilderness of Zin along the side of Edom. Your southern boundary shall begin from the end of the Dead Sea on the east. Your boundary shall turn south of the ascent of Akrabin and cross to Zin, and its outer limit shall be south of Kadesh Barnea. Then it shall go on to Hazar Adar and cross to Asmon. The boundary shall turn from Asmon to the Wadi of Egypt, and its termination shall be at the sea. For the western boundary, you shall have the Great Sea in its coast. This shall be your western boundary. This shall be your northern boundary. From the Great Sea, you shall mark out your line to Mount Hor. From Mount Hor, you shall mark it out to Lebo Hamath, and the outer limit of the boundary shall be at Zedad. Then the boundary shall extend to Ziphron, and its end shall be at Hazar Enan. This shall be your northern boundary. You shall mark out your eastern boundary from Hazar Enan to Shechem, and the boundary shall continue down from Shechem to Riblah on the east side of Ain. And the boundary shall go down and reach the eastern slope of the Sea of Chinnereth. And the boundary shall go down to the Jordan, and its end shall be at the Dead Sea. This shall be your land with its boundaries all around. Moses commanded the Israelites, saying, "This is the land that you shall inherit by lot, which the Lord has commanded to give to the 9 tribes and to the half tribe. For the tribe of the Reubenites by their ancestral houses, and the tribe of Gadites by their ancestral houses, excuse me, have taken their inheritance, and also the half tribe of Manasseh. The 2 tribes and the half tribe have taken their inheritance beyond the Jordan at Jericho eastwards, towards the sunset." Shall I carry on? Or?
Yes, please. Yeah.
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "These are the names of the men who shall apportion the land to you for inheritance. The priest Eleazar and Joshua son of Nun. You shall take 1 leader of every tribe to apportion the land for inheritance. These are the names of the men. Of the tribe of Judah, Caleb son of Jephunneh. Of the tribe of the Simeonites, Shimei son of Ammihud. Of the tribe of Benjamin, Eldad son of Chislon. Of the tribe of the Danites, the leader, Buki son of Jogli. Of the Josephites, of the tribe of the Manassites, the leader, Haniel son of Ephod. And of the tribe of the Ephraimites, the leader, Kemuel son of Shiptan. Of the tribe of the Zebulunites, the leader, Elizaphan son of Parnak. Of the tribe of the Issacharites, the leader, Paltiel son of Azam. And of the tribe of the Asherites, the leader, Ahud son of Shelomi. Of the tribe of the Naphtalites, the leader, Pedahel son of Ammihud. These are the ones whom the Lord appointed. The Lord commanded to apportion the inheritance for the Israelites in the land of Canaan.
Well done.
Yes.
No text for preaching Sunday.
But what do you make of that? I mean, what's your observation here about what I mean?
My first observation, if I can jump in, is that there'll be archaeologists in Israel working frantically to work out where those boundaries are and make sure that Israel occupies all of them.
Yes.
And I know there is an archaeological sort of rivalry between Israeli and Palestinian archaeologists, because clearly you want to find out the histories on your side.
I once went to an archaeological site in Colombia. They finished the excavations, and there was just a sort of caretaker there. And we were talking to the caretaker, and he said that there were various opinions amongst the archaeologists about what various things mean. And his observation was, he was just the local guy who'd been looking after the security prepared. His observation was that whichever archaeologist had the loudest voice and the strongest personality, actually his view prevailed as to what the real meaning of these amazing discoveries were. And I guess what you're saying is the same thing. I mean, that you interpret the excavations of the ruins, in exactly the same way. And but it's a kind of, it's the divine approval of this, isn't it? It's the Lord spoke to Moses and says, "This is yours," and that you've got a clearly defined area of land, and you've also got a group of people who are appointed to divide that land up. It's an extraordinary kind of thing to happen.
But isn't the question about what does it mean to have land that is yours?
Yeah.
Does it mean that you can do what you like with it? Or does it mean that you're responsible for it?
Yeah.
And the people who live there already?
Yes. I mean, that is consistent with the notion of stewardship that comes from Genesis chapter 2.
Yeah.
And it's consistent with the earth is the Lord's, and everything that's in it, that God has the right to delegate. And it's consistent with the story of the Hebrew Bible, which is about land is there not just to be given, but is part of a covenant relationship. So the land is there as within a covenant. And that covenant, as we saw in Isaiah, requires justice and righteousness. Did you want to speak, Harley?
Yeah, sorry, I think somebody's mic is playing up. Just wanted to say maybe.
I think it's probably your. Could you mute your mic, Graham, unless you want to speak?
That's okay. No.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So within this kind of, I mean, I just wanted to read that passage just because it seems to say, this is really a fait accompli. This is what God has given. This is direct. So if we go on now to read another passage, which is when it all starts to happen. And I thought this time, maybe I'll read this.
Oh.
And I think you can jump in whenever you like.
Me?
Everybody. You can jump in with a boo or a hooray or a what on earth. I mean, just come in and just stop at any point you like in this reading, and don't be shy. because this is the start of the Judges, when Moses has died, Joshua has died, and we're just on the boundaries of the promised land. After the death of Joshua, the Israelites inquired of the Lord, "Who shall go up first for us against the Canaanites to fight against them?" The Lord said, "Judah shall go up, and I hereby give the land into his hand." Judah said to his brother Simeon, "Come up with me into the territory allotted to me, that we may fight against the Canaanites. Then I too will go with you into the territory allotted to you." So Simeon went with him. Then Judah went up, and the Lord gave the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hand, and they defeated 10,000 of them at Bezek. They came upon Adoni-Bezek at Bezek and fought against him, and defeated the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Adoni-Bezek fled, but they pursued him and caught him and cut off his thumbs and big toes.
Oh,
No.
what? That's nasty. Oh,
Gets worse.
oh.
Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off used to pick up scraps under my table as I have done. So God has paid me back.
Oh,
And they brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there.
good.
Oh, that wasn't the reaction I was expecting, but there you go.
Yeah, well.
So for some reason or other, they cut off thumbs and big toes, and quite nasty, really. And
Presumably, you can't eat easily if you haven't got your thumbs,
yeah,
Oh,
and you can't run away if you haven't got your big toe.
that's right.
yeah. Good point.
But it also tells us that we're living in a very, we're talking about a very violent society. That it's already. I mean, this guy who's been conquered, and had his thumbs and big toes cut off, is actually somebody who's already doing that. That's the prevailing mode of operation in there.
Mm.
And then the people of Judah fought against Jerusalem and took it. They put it to the sword and set the city on fire. And afterwards, the people of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites, who lived in the hill country, in the Negev, and in the lowlands. Judah went against the Canaanites who lived in Hebron. The name Hebron was formerly Kiriath Arba, and they defeated Sheshai and Ahiman and Talmai. Okay. So this is about clear defeat. They just defeated these people, and the Canaanites. Canaanites have a rough time here. And I guess the Canaanites are, people we now call Palestinians. I mean, I think that's really what, sort of parallel would be. And from there, they went against the inhabitants of Debir. The name of Debir was formerly Kiriath Sephir. So, I mean, there's a big thing going on at the moment in Wales about the naming of places, and how a lot of Welsh names are being changed, particularly house names. When English people buy the houses, they change the names. And names that have been there for centuries, fields and cottages, and so on, and then they just get renamed to some ridiculous English name. And there's quite a strong, protest against that, because it's kind of taking away, the historic identity of the place and the people. And that's what's going on here, I think. you know, they're changing the names of the places.
Mm.
And they,
Well, yeah.
yeah, go on, sorry.
I was just going to say, I mean, that's what we did in colonial times, isn't it? We went to lands and then gave them English names. I mean, why is New York called New York?
Yeah, yes. Bombay rather than Mumbai.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're changing those names back now. Yeah. Then Caleb, so this is, yeah, there's this, you are getting the kind of colonial kind of feel about this thing, aren't you? You know. Then Caleb said, interesting to hear your reaction to this one. Then Caleb said, whoever attacks Kiriath Sethi and takes it, I will give him my daughter Aksah as wife.
Boo.
Shame on him. Shame on him.
And Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it, and he gave him his daughter Aksah as wife. Am I reading it right? When she came to him, she urged him to ask her father for a field.
Hang on a minute. How was Aksah then related to Othniel?
I should have got that out.
So Othniel was Caleb's younger brother. So that's his niece.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem at all right.
Yeah.
Oh,
No.
It's
Okay.
interesting.
We're adding incest to the
Yeah.
story. Yeah.
It's interesting that God's voice isn't here.
That is very interesting.
yes. Mm.
It is very interesting, actually. And when she came to him, she urged him to ask her father for a field. As she dismounted from her donkey, Caleb said to her, what do you want? And she said to him, give me a present, since you have set me in the land of Negev. Give me also Gullah Mayim. So Caleb gave her Upper Gullah and Lower Gullah. Do we know who Caleb is?
No.
No. I mean, that's fair enough. Caleb, let me share again and go back to this one. Can you see that? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, Caleb is here. In Numbers chapter 13, do you remember the story of the people complaining, you know, moaning and complaining about to Israel? And Caleb and Joshua are, and a group of people, sorry, Caleb, I think Joshua was with them, a group of the Hebrews go into the promised land as spies. And Caleb comes back and says, Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, because they were all complaining, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we were well able to overcome it. And then the men who had gone up with him said, we're not able to go up against these people, for they are stronger than we are. So they brought to the Israelites an unfavorable report of the land that they'd spied out, saying, the land that we have gone through as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people we saw in it are of great size. So Caleb is the one who wants to invade straight away, but he's thwarted in his plan because the other people, the other spies, were kind of nervous. And then when we come to chapter 14, we read, now God is here, and the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, how long shall this wicked congregation complain against me? So God is a bit fed up. I have heard the complaints of the Israelites, which they complain against me. Say to them, as I live, says the Lord, I will do to you the very things I heard you say. Your dead bodies shall fall in this very wilderness, and of all your number included in the census from 20 years old and upwards, who have complained against me, not one of you shall come into the land in which I swore to settle you, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, son of Nun. And that's because they were in favor of the invasion. But your little ones, who you said would become booty, I will bring in, and they shall know the land that you have despised. But as for you, your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness. So the occupation, if I can call it that, is delayed, and Caleb is seen as one of the people who has got the strength to go about the business and carry out the invasion, has got the courage to do it. That makes sense. I've lost you now because I'm doing the wrong thing. Sharing the screen again and going back to that. So that's Caleb. Go on.
So I think it was Neil said about where's God's voice here, and in the passage we've just read, it said the Lord says. But is it in narrative literature, the genre, is it the case that the narrator is God's voice? So as we're reading Numbers, there's a wider story about what God is doing through the story. So the narrator is God's voice. Is that how you read Hebrew literature, or not always? In every case, I don't know.
I'm not sure what the answer to that is. My thought is, but other people may know more. The thought is that these are kind of historical narratives, in the Judges particularly, rather like Kings and Chronicles. They are narratives of the history and the way in which history was recorded, but they are all telling a story of how God is intervening in the history. So the assumption is that God is the kind of the protagonist in the whole thing, and God is the one who is making the history. I think that would be the way to describe it, but not necessarily the narrator of the story.
Okay, yeah.
It's interesting, in the Hebrew Bible, these books are called the lesser prophets or the former prophets or something, but the emphasis is on the fact that they're actually history, but with a slant, with a message. And I think that's made quite a difference to me, since I've realized that they're not intended to be historical in the sense that we possibly understand history, although all history has got a slant. But these are very clearly trying to identify where God's at work in these events. So I guess if we committed what we would now call genocide, well, where was God in that? God commanded us to do it.
Yeah, I mean, then it becomes dangerous. Then these passages do become dangerous.
Yes.
So, and the question is, where does, I mean, we're living in a time where ethno-nationalism is strong. I mean, it's strong in India now. It's strong in Russia. In Ukraine, it's strong in Israel, and so it's Sweden. Yeah.
I think.
Did you want to come in there, Graham? I think you've frozen, actually.
Also,
oh, okay. So just quickly read. Well, not quickly, but I'll read on, and you keep interrupting because it's really helpful. The descendants.
Could I just say something about what we've just read? One thing which is very much missing here is talk of an army. Now, one of the things, but it's a description of, of conquest and the sort of things that armies do. But it's all written down as if it's a sort of story about 5 to 10 people who are the protagonists of all this stuff. But if you want to do this to your neighbors, then, it takes more than 5 of you, and you need more preparation than simply sitting down and saying, we've got to do the Canaanites. So it's all, from that point of view, it's a bit deceptive.
It's really interesting because it doesn't say how they did it. They just conquered them, you know. But
No,
presumably
no.
there must have been a bit of fisticuffs somewhere, because people don't give up their land quite so easy. So, but we don't know what size, what scale, you know. And of course, when they talk the names, I mean, we talk about clans here, you know, and it's clans moving into an area. I once read how the Somalis clans moved and how they occupied. They would send 2 or 3 people to live in a village, and then they'd bring their relatives, and then they'd bring some more, and eventually it became a kind of Somali area. So Somalia began in the sort of Middle Ages with people coming from Saudi Arabia, the head of the clans, and gradually, you know, they moved in and occupied. It was a kind of infiltration rather than a fisticuffs, you know. I mean, an invasion. If that makes sense. Let's read on.
I've heard that said of past Testament too, that actually, I think some historians think that it was the 2 parties lived side by side, so the Israelites and the natural inhabitants lived side by side. But
right. Well, let's go on then.
Is it like that? So
yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Peter, because if we read on, the descendants of Hobab the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up with the people of Judah from the city of palms into the wilderness of Judah, which lies in the Negev near Arah. Then they went and settled with the Amalekites. Judah went with his brother Simeon, and they defeated the Canaanites who inhabited Zebah and devoted it to destruction. So the city was called Hormah. Judah took Gaza with its territory, Ashkelon with its territory, and Ekron with its territory. The Lord was with Judah, and he took possession of the hill country, but could not drive out the inhabitants of the plain because they had chariots of iron. So there you are, Graham, and that's a little bit about army and something going on there with fights. They've got chariots of iron, which the Hebrews didn't have. And Hebron was given to Caleb, as Moses had said, and he drove it out from the 3 sons of Anak. But the Benjamites did not drive out their Jebusites who lived in Jerusalem. So the Jebusites have lived in Jerusalem among the Benjamites to this day, which is what you were saying, Peter. So we've got a bit of both going on. We've got a bit of the armies, which, you know, we talk about, and we've got this coexistence. The house of Joseph also went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. The house of Joseph sent out spies to Bethel. The name of the city was formerly Luz. And when the spies saw a man coming out of the city, they said to him, "Show us the way into the city, and we will deal kindly with you." So he showed them the way into the city, and they put the city to the sword, but they let the man and his family go. So the man went to the land of the Hittites and built a city and named it Luz. That is its name to this day. A refugee. I mean, it's a refugee. I mean, the parallel that came to my mind was Afghani interpreters. You know, who helped, you know, the British or the Americans, and then when, you know, the Taliban come back, they have got to be rescued and go somewhere else. I mean, they were there at the end. Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Bethshean and its villages, or Tanak and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Ibleam and its villages, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages. But the Canaanites continued to live in that land. And when Israel grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but did not in fact drive them out. So we've got a number of things going on here. You know, we've got, you know, the complete annihilation. We've got, you know, some people escaping, and we've got some people getting a kind of inferior status, you know, in the countries that they were brought up in. Can you think of parallels? I'm sure you can. I mean, it goes on a bit like this, but I just read on. And Ephraim did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Giza, but the Canaanites lived among them in Giza. Zebulun did not drive out the inhabitants of Kitron or the inhabitants of Nehalon, but the Canaanites lived among them and became subject to forced labor. Asher did not drive out the inhabitants of Akko or the inhabitants of Sidon or Ahab or Heber or the Ephik or Reda. You got that right. But the Asherites lived among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out. Naphtali did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh or the inhabitants of Beth Anath, but lived among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land. Nevertheless, the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh and of Beth Anath became subjects to forced labor for them. So you've got this apartheid, kind of system emerging there. The Amorites pressed the Danites back into the hill country. They did not allow them to come down to the plain. The Amorites continued to live in Har Heres, in Aijalon and Shaalbim, but the hand of the house of Joseph rested heavily on them, and they became subject to forced labor. The border of the Amorites ran from the ascent of Akrabaim, from Sila and upwards. Okay, so we've got a picture of a political situation which is now very messy. You've got parts of the country occupied in one way, parts of the country coexisting, and parts, with the original inhabitants, and part of the country where the original inhabitants have been made inferior in their own country. So it's a political mess in the making, no doubt about it. And then we come to an angel of the Lord who appears. Now the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I brought you up from Egypt and brought you into the land that I have promised your ancestors. I said, I will never break my covenant with you. For your part, do not make a covenant with the inhabitants of this land. Tear down their altars. But you have not obeyed my command. See what you have done. So now I say, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall become adversaries to you, and their gods shall be a snare to you. When the angel of the Lord spoke these words to all the Israelites, the people lifted up their voices and wept. So they named that place Bochim, which means weepers, and there they sacrificed to the Lord. And when Joshua dismissed the people, the Israelites all went down to their own inheritances. Now, the word inheritances, to take possession of the land. Okay. So this idea that the land is an inheritance, is strong and is carried through. It's the inheritance from Abraham. So now you've got a situation where, yes, you've got an instruction that the faith of the people, the religion of the people, religion is the wrong word, but the faith of the people is now in conflict with the gods of the area that they've inherited. So you've got a religious conflict already taking place here, and an assertion, that God has, made clear what it is. Where are you up to now? What are you thinking about all of this?
What will be their religion? These other clans, tribes. What would be their religions then? What would be their gods?
Well, they would all have their own local gods, and they would be kind of fertility gods, probably. It would be based around fertility, about the harvest, and about the weather and so on. They would have their own sort of rituals around that.
Why couldn't the Israelites go along with that then?
Because they would have idols, I think.
Oh.
I mean, that would be the sticking point, and always is. Idolatry is always the sticking point, for Christians as well.
Yeah.
So what do you make of this now? It's really interesting stuff. I mean, in many ways, I kind of want to say, is this just telling us the start of the story? The story that becomes incredibly complicated, incredibly messy, and that what goes on in the rest of the Bible is an unraveling of this situation that is created right at the beginning, and the dynamic is going to be complicated, and how the people live in the land is going to be difficult because of this foundation. And where does God fit into that?
What seems most disturbing is that the bits of the story beforehand that sounded good to us when they didn't manage to drive out the other inhabitants and lived alongside them, now we find out that they're the bits that God wasn't happy with. God would have actually been far more happy with them if they had chucked them all out or killed them all. And that's the theme that comes up again and again that's disturbing, that actually what really pleases God is that these non-Israelites are killed. Well, that's what it appears to be, and that's what I think we have to struggle with.
Let me throw one thing in, which I think is really interesting. I mean, when were these stories written down, and why were they written down? Because what we know is, I think, that all of these stories were around, and people they would be part of the folk memory of the people, but they were written down and redacted in this format after the exile, on the return. So the question is whether or not the stories are written there not to tell you about the Canaanites, but to give legitimacy to the return. So to give legitimacy to Israel asserting itself, and the Hebrews, asserting themselves in that space when they have been attacked and under attack, when they have been invaded, when they've been carried away, when they have become a diasporic community. So, the Hebrews were widely spread around North Africa and what we now call the Middle East, And so are these stories not really about telling us, what is now seen as, the right of Israelis, to treat Palestinians as forced laborers if they were there, but are they just saying, no, this was our history and we've got the right to come back and we've got the right to this space? It's possible.
It's quite a mixture, isn't it? I mean, I'm also thinking about the bit where the angel of the Lord comes to them, and basically they have to drive out the people of the land because they haven't done what they should have done. If they'd done what they should have done, that wouldn't have happened. I mean, okay, what they should have done isn't brilliant, but really it does imply, perhaps, maybe I'm trying to be too generous here, but it does seem to imply that you could live alongside them, but not mix with them. And if you'd done that, that would be okay, but you haven't. You've mixed with them. That was too much. So now, as a result of that, you've got to get rid of these people.
And that's where we live, I mean, we have a mosque down the road and we can be friendly, but we don't, it's not a problem to us. I mean, we coexist,
I'm not particularly comfortable with that, but
go on.
Well, in that it implies that you don't interrelate in any sense with people who are different from you. You kind of, they're there and we're there and that's it. That's the extent of the relationship. I'm not sure that I feel that's great either, but at least you're not killing them.
No, I mean, that's a good thing. But I don't think I quite meant that. I mean, what I think, but at some point, in a multi-phase society, there are spaces where you have to honor the integrity of your own faith at the same time, without that being an oppression to people of, you know, a different persuasion. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's complicated, I think.
But it always seemed, no, I'm going to be oversimplistic, and I'm sure Graham or Pius is going to completely contradict this in a moment, but is it the case that the violence comes when Israel's done something wrong, often in the Old Testament, that it doesn't do what it should have done originally, and then God says, well, look, you've done that, we're going to have to do this now?
Yeah.
That if they'd done what they should have done originally, it wouldn't have been so problematic.
Yeah. Yes,
I don't know. I mean, that's off the top of my head, and I don't know if that's true at all, but it would make me more comfortable if it was.
That God has to work through what's already sort of been set up to be a bad situation.
Yeah.
Now the Lord is just helping the Israelites to deal with it, as can only really be dealt with in, you know, in a what is a horrendous situation. Maybe. I don't know. It's a good point.
It is true, though, sometimes that it's the other way around.
Okay.
Because Israel doesn't do the violent thing, that God appears to be angry with them. There are passages where they're supposed to kill everyone and they don't, and that's a problem apparently with God.
Yeah.
And that's a real problem for us, I think, as well.
You're muted, Vaughan.
Just a last thought. Why is it that this question of the promised land and this question of occupation of the land is not an issue in the New Testament? We'll return to it, but I just want to throw it out as a teaser at the end and just read to you from the first chapter of Acts of the Apostles at the ascension of Jesus. So when they had come together, they asked him, Lord, is this the time when you will restore the kingdom to Israel? And Jesus replied, it is not for you to know the times or periods that the Father has set by his own authority. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. So there's a radical shift in the New Testament from the land as being the space which God has given and where God, you know, and where we have to be faithful to God, to something else. And I think then, you know, I think for us, you know, we see this story moving through and the narrative moving through. So those early chapters, which are complicated and difficult, do begin to resolve themselves as the story, as the story emerges and the narrative emerges, and moves on into the New Testament period. But I think what we've done tonight is extremely useful, actually. I mean, I think it's just being honest and open about, you know, where these difficult passages take us, and we don't have to rest within those chapters. We've got to be critical of them, understanding of them, know what they're saying, and see them as context for what follows on, but not necessarily see them as the end point or the end point of the story, if that makes sense. There we go. Any last thoughts?
I mean, I literally, sorry, do you mean for a second? I mean, I was literally just talking about, you know, these sort of passages in the Bible with my girlfriend the other night. Kind of reading, here she came along, actually. It was, yeah, just to sort of explore them. I mean, it's very difficult, you know, just this sort of thing. Very, very difficult. I don't really have any really good answers myself. Sure, people still struggle over it, you know. It's just, I mean, I've always found it really hard. The stuff in the law books, particularly, which I find it really, really hard, you know.
But isn't the starting point, and this may be simplistic or simple, but isn't the starting point that everything is is interpreted in the Bible in the light of what Jesus tells us is the greatest command.
Yeah.
Which is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, might, and strength, and to love your neighbour as yourself. Well, going around and bashing their brains out isn't very loving.
Isn't very loving, no. I mean, you don't necessarily have to go to the New Testament. You go to Isaiah, I imagine.
Yeah.
You can go to Jeremiah. I mean, one of my favorite things in Jeremiah, Jeremiah telling telling the people of Jerusalem, no, we got to surrender. We can't, we're gonna fail, all right? We're gonna fail. We're not, yeah, we're God's people, but everyone's like, no, we're okay. We're God's people. It's fine. No, we're gonna fail. We want peace. We're gonna surrender. We're gonna do this sort of, the good Jewish, good Christian thing, and we're going to surrender. But anyway, I don't know. I love that book.
Or Jonah wanting, everybody to be slaughtered in Nineveh, but them being a misery guts when they're not.
Right.
I mean that there's lots of opposing things, but I think we have to start from there, surely. Otherwise, it all falls apart.
Yeah.